Good evening, and welcome to the Wheelhouse edition of Tuesday Traces. Welcome to all the folks registered and have joined us via the Zoom webinar, and welcome to everyone joining us via the V1 Sports Facebook Live channel. For those of you who are new to V1, let me tell you a little bit about who we are. V1 specializes in vision and ground force technologies, and over the last 26 years, we've supported over 4 million lessons and 10,000 V1 affiliated golf and now baseball and softball coaches. V1 Sports is the leader in ground pressure, and the V1 pressure mat technology can uncover truths about player movement, specifically in rotational sports here. Wheelhouse is a forward-thinking series where we get to talk about all things ground mechanics and sports skill development. And tonight is no exception as we get to discuss how to identify movement restrictions with the visual and pressure technology aids, as well as a deep dive into the world of functional movement screens and how to perform an evidence-based assessment while using the V1 pressure mat. We love answering questions, everyone, throughout the evening, so please post your questions in the chat window in Zoom or Facebook. We'll do our best to get to those throughout the discussion. And also, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted within our V1 Sports YouTube channel in the coming days to follow. My name is Anthony Medaglia, head of baseball, and we're also here with our host, Philip Stotter, director of sports science. We have a jam-packed discussion tonight, but first, we'd like to introduce our special guest, Mitch Taylor. Mitch is a rock star in the world of movement and sports performance, guys. As a human movement specialist, which is a very cool title, Mitch focuses on human movement science and the holistic approach to athletic development. Mitch is the co-creator of Stick Mobility, and with almost 25 years in the industry, he's educated and consulted for a variety of professional athletes and organizations, including a couple World Series champions. Mitch is the owner of BaseballStrong.net and San Jose Strength Coach. Currently, Mitch is in the process of developing the Movement Project, a platform and resource to showcase his passion and knowledge for developing the athlete-first approach in order to excel in sport and life while reaching their full athletic potential. Mitch, thanks for being a part of the V1 family, man, and welcome to Tuesday Traces.
Right. Thank you guys so much. Glad to be a part of it. This will be awesome.
Phil, go ahead. We'll go into your little history with Mitch, right? This kind of
for sure.
No,
for sure. No, sorry, I was on a little delay there. So Mitch and I have known each other for some years now. I think Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, the first time we met was at the MLB winter meetings. I'm trying to think the year. Was it 2018, 17?
2018.
Was it 18?
Yeah.
So Mitch was there with as co-founder of Stick Mobility, working workshops with the different Major League Baseball teams. I was there showing off a little plastic toy of mine called MoFlex. And the two of us, saw basically this, same viewpoint we each had on correcting human movement in the human body and understanding that, it doesn't take a lot or crazy gym equipment and all these other things to work with an individual from the ground up or from the top down, whichever that is. And so, Mitch and I, started talking, and we developed a relationship and friendship since then. And we live, breathe, eat, sleep, you name it, the world of movement. And maybe Mitch, why don't you go into a little bit more about your background, give the viewers, a little bit better understanding. I've already bored them enough time with my background, so I'll let you go ahead and give them a little bit about you this time.
Okay. Yes. I mean, I think that, the process started all the way back in college, being a baseball player, going through injuries, that even goes back to high school, first knee surgery when I was 16, right in between basketball season and baseball. Things that developed over time, but also from a bad car accident some years prior to that. And then, we moved forward, we're in college playing, get that, one of those normal things lots of baseball players do. Arm starts bugging, get a bad shoulder, no one knows what to do. You just keep playing through it. You keep doing stuff and play through the knee problems, play through everything. You just play hard. If you're competitive, you just keep going. And, then now at college time, I ended up, shoulder got really bad. There was days I couldn't lift my arm over my head, but yet was back out there the next day trying to do it again. And, had all these problems. So it went into got a level 2 tear in your supraspinatus. So in the rotator cuff. So I kept trying to play through. And then luckily at that time, my cousin was a physical therapist. So I went to her for some help. And, good thing she was one of those kind of forward thinkers, looking at the whole body, not just treating that symptom. So we started doing a lot of rehab stuff. So it got to the point where they wouldn't let me touch a baseball for 6 months. So that was really tough. That was hard to not do anything for all that time. So for athletes to understand, and that started this whole passion of, we've got to be able to do things better and see it ahead of time and take a better approach. So I rehabbed it, came back, throwing harder, healthy, everything going great, second season, and then tore my hamstring. So that happened first with a nice little pull, catching a ball overhead, running back. Tried to do stuff on it. Approach was very wrong. Kind of do nothing. Let me ice it, stem it, ultrasound it, go back in the game and be a leadoff, and then I'm in a game, I tear it in the middle of a game trying to round third. So that kind of killed that season. Then I keep going. It was hard to recover. My whole game was speed. Not being a big guy, I had to produce speed and power inside my body and use coordination. Went on to Long Beach State after that. So that was at junior college. And it was just like, hey, this is way too good of a program, too good of things. Like, I wasn't the same. I didn't feel comfortable upstairs. No one connected the body and the brain back. And so I'd go full speed and feel like it was going to give, or things weren't working. So I switched my gear and working with my cousin. She's kind of like, you're interested in physical therapy, helping people. If you go do that, come back and I'll make you a partner. So I started diving into that. But then at school, I realized, I don't know if this is exactly what I want to do. I don't want people to go through what I went through when you can't play, you get depressed, you can't do the thing.
Losing him.
Yep, I think we lost a little bit of audio, Mitch.
Got to be better ways that we're looking at things. We get me? Yeah. So diving in, there's got to be better ways to look at movement, to look at performance, to look at rehabbing people. So it's been that process, and then diving into everything I possibly could, applying it, finding it, that leads me into all those things, then to us finally creating stick mobility, looking at sports and a lot at baseball. Why do we keep seeing this trend of the same injuries? Why are certain things happening over and over, yet we're far more advanced, but we're seeing more injuries than we ever have in sports? Are we lifting too much? Are we getting too tight, too stiff? So the biggest thing I saw, like, we're very good at strength, just like we're really good at moving forward, not so good moving laterally and in rotation. That's where most injuries happen. So it had me like thinking, how can we keep improving this? We've got to do a better job. They're lacking recovery. They're lacking mobility. If we're lacking mobility, what are we lacking? We're also lacking stability. So it's like there wasn't a foundation and platforms being built. We're trying to jump the gun. We've lost development. So that's been the passion, like you said, eat, sleep, breathe, drink, everything, movement, like finding overall, the key to all of it is human movement. The body and the brain speak movement. It doesn't speak muscles. It doesn't understand just a singular muscle. It understands movements and movement patterns. The fascial system came into play. We started looking at that in Thomas Meyer's work. And I'm like, wait, I've read this stuff from Paul Chek and Chuck Wolf back in the day. They just called it something different. Slings, oblique slings, and flexibility highways. And I'm like, okay, seeing something here. We're training. This is how we move. This is how we create gait, running, sprinting, rotation. Our power is in that center, in that X line, in that spiral line. Take that further. How do we get to there? Ground force. What's our interaction to everything? The surface that we're on. So if we take that away, if we're always in a shoe, our foot's crammed, it doesn't feel the floor. It doesn't sense the vibrations. It doesn't sense the position we're in. So we've got to take that further. We've got to get people to understand, how can we create outcomes? So that's been my number one goal all these years now, is how.
Lost a little audio again. See if it pops back in. I don't know.
So Phil, real quick, I mean, obviously, Mitch, the moral, right? Like, so the moral, right? Individualism, right, Mitch?
Correct. Finding that individual approach, because we're seeing in other things, if it's a one size fits all, it's not going to work. There are some things that we could give if we look at, okay, here's the sport, here's the movements in it. Here's the trends that we see. There are a lot of general stuff we can work on, but cover the gamuts. So I'm always looking at the full puzzle. Like I said, what we were good at is kind of maybe creating the engine, the motor moving ahead. How about the brakes? If you start moving faster,
Right.
we need a better braking system. We need better, adjustment to control it. So like, how's your alignment? So we need all of these things. So again, it comes into like good at pushing everyone, not so good at recovering them, not very good at mobility. Now, mobility is the key to movement because that's how we control it all. That's how we get that neuromuscular control. That's part of that brain to body connection. It's all about our movements. So now, through stick mobility and all of this, that's where I started creating my platform, that it starts at stability, mobility. Then we go into loadability, to pliability, movability, skill. So we need this development to ultimately get to skill. Because if you're going to be a high-end athlete, you're gaining scholarships or getting paid as a professional athlete, then number one, it's all about skill. That's what's paying the bills, right? That's what's paying you to get to the top. Right. But how are you going to
We lost him. Let's take that point, Phil, as it's that ladder, right? As to where are we starting out as an athlete, and then when we get to skill. So like that mobility, stability aspect, right? So how does that play into assessment, and what is functional movement, and why is that important?
Well, no, Mitch, introed us and segued us perfectly for what we're talking about tonight, and that's screening the individual. And whether it's an athlete, whether it's a weekend warrior, whatever the person is, and one of those unique universal tests is the functional movement screen. And so everybody who's in S&C or works with athletes or has any type of work in this kind of arena has heard of the functional movement screen. Functional movement screen. The TPI assessment for golf was based out of these functional movement screens designed by Greg Cook. And also from the, functional movement screen, it then trickled into what we're, Greg Rose is doing in On Base U for baseball. And what we do in the clinical and medical world, the way we screen or test a patient, whoever is coming in, we always screen or test. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to talk about those layers. Mitch brought up about stability, mobility, and understanding that and tying those things together. He also mentioned kinetics and kinematics. How our body moves with force, kinetics, and then how our body moves, kinematics, without the force. So if we're looking at basically to look at an athlete, to look at a golf swing, a baseball swing, we're looking at somebody with a vision tool like the V1 vision tool. We're looking at the way their body's moving, and we can measure that. And that's what we're going to dive into tonight. We're going to go through the 7 screens of the functional movement test. And what you're going to see is basically how that correlates to the actual, movement, whether it's baseball movement, whether it's golf movement. Tonight, we're going to do just the screen movement. And so whether you're a golf enthusiast, golf pro, golf whatever, or you're a baseball, everybody's welcome tonight, because what we're focused on is screening the actual movement process. And when you see that, you'll see how we use kinetic side, how we use force, how we look at foot distribution, and how we can tie into an overhead deep squat test into the way the golfer or baseball player sets up, the way they go into their unweighting, how they shift their pressure, how they recruit. And we want to look at the athlete first, because we want to understand how is this person typically move. From how they typically move then tells us how they're going to move when they're doing a sport specific movement. And we can tie those two things together. And so Mitch and I are going to dissect an athlete tonight, and we're going to take them through those different screens. And this is something that's very special, because in medicine or in athletic performance, you typically don't use technology to do these screens. It's typically a subjective approach to it. And what we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on using objective and quantifiable tools like the V1 vision and ground pressure tool to be able to see this. So if you're on tonight and you have used our ground pressure for golf, or if you've used it for the swing or the vision tool, you've used these. You've screened somebody. You've screened yourself. Tonight, we're going to screen basic motions, basic fundamental movements. And we're going to dive into how that correlates to what to expect from yourself or what to expect from the athlete you're working with.
Right. That's awesome. Mitch, we talked earlier today, right? And while Phil's getting this set up, you said you know guys who play on top of the ground versus guys who play through the ground. What does that mean?
So if we almost look at every sport, the best players, the best athletes are playing through the ground instead of just playing on top of the ground. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to create power, any kind of real power and force, it has to be through the ground. We need that ground force. So even we'll see in screenings or certain stuff like that, to really have stability and then mobility, there has to be tension and force. And the people who are just standing on the ground, so let's take a pitcher, right? Single leg movement. They've got to go up. And number one, they've got to be stabilized first in a balanced position on one leg. The ones who are playing on top of the ground, they're just kind of there, thinking I'm balanced. The good ones are driving and pushing through the ground, already activating or presetting, say, their movement and torsion. And now it's going to be individualized. Which one do I need? There's a few different ways that you'll see in all pitchers how they set up to now create that force down the mound. So if we're going to hit, if you watch Ohtani, Soto, the best ones, they're transferring force through the ground. The other ones are just spinning on top of the ground, if that makes sense. So it's like play through the ground for speed and power, play on top of it. It might look good, but there's nothing behind it.
Yep. Clear as day. That's awesome.
Yep. What I just queued up here is an athlete, and I'll give it away. It's my 11-year-old who plays 12U baseball. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at how this individual moves. And one thing I want to bring up before we get deep into this tonight is when you screen or when you're working with an athlete, when you're working with ground pressure, when you're doing any of these types of things, the age that they start, and how they develop their skill set, this is all learned behavior. When we learn to walk, it's a learned behavior. You're watching your parents walk. So at a younger age, we're going to learn a lot quicker than an older age. Science shows that someone who is, between the ages of 8 to 16 learns at a rate of could learn to do something brand new in 2 weeks, where someone, say, over 40, it's going to take us probably 8 months to learn something and to rewire our brain. And I can go into that story, but that's something that we have to understand is you're never too young or too old to learn, but the pace of it, if we get to them when they're young, we can really start to improve their movement patterns. And especially for young people as well as old, we're visual learners. And that's why these tools are so great for this. And so, like I said before, there's a subjective approach, and that goes to the effect of the actual person giving that screen or looking at that. The best baseball hitting coach in the world is going to see it different than some dad that likes baseball and wants to coach a team. They may see corrections differently. It'd be obvious, the same for golf. So what this tool, though, does, and what's so great about it, and you're going to see in a second here, when we go to screen, and no matter if we're going to do a deep squat, overhead squat, it doesn't matter if it's that, a golf swing, a baseball swing, you name it, we're going to look at some movement patterns here. And so Mitch and I were, playing around with this earlier today. We went through some of these movement patterns, and, he was seeing all the things that correlate to how my son actually pitches and how my son actually swings a baseball bat. And so we're going to flow through that really quick, and we're going to flow through a movement pattern. And I'm going to let Mitch, speak on the points that he sees, and we're going to draw back to that. Let's just talk about setup and stance position here in the squatting position. Mitch, why don't you just go ahead, and I'm just going to start, drawing and having fun with this.
Perfect. Yeah. So, again, not all eyes are going to see it, but like trained eye after all these years, I catch a lot of little nuances and little things. The first thing I notice is I look from the ground up and look at his feet. So we could see that right foot's turned out. So then therefore the knee's going to cave in a little bit. That hip's already leaking forward. So it's already turned him into rotation. And then I know it's a trickle effect up the pattern. So then right shoulder is going to drop and lean. If we look at the stick, he is slanted. It's lower on the right side than the left. And as the grass starts getting in there, you're going to see that more. Those are the first things I see and notice. And then after all these years of seeing people do it, I kind of know what's going to happen. He's going to cave in on that right side. He's going to weight shift over to the left. And, you know, he's basically already, and this is a lot of people walking around and they don't know it. They're stuck in rotation already just by setup, because that one foot is always turned out into external rotation. So I also know he's not going to create great ground force and use that big toe mojo. So there's the shift. You see it go off the plumb line. Everything went towards his left hip. That right knee caves in, drops in, and there goes his torso to his T-spine and shoulders, starting to twist and turn, trying to compensate the movement. At the bottom, he starts to find it better. So it's like we can look at things, and what we talked about earlier, most people are going to look at it and go, wow, that's an ass to grass squat. He could drop all the way down there. We got great mobility. I go like, yeah, but I don't like the way he gets there, right? So I don't like the way he gets there and how it's set up, because over time, that's not going to be efficient. It's going to lead to a lot of the stuff we'd see. This is where I started asking you, hey, so what does he do in his swing? Does he have a hard time getting his backside through, getting the hip through? Do we collapse? And you're like, yep, hands drop, this happens. Well, that's kind of what I explained. That whole side starts caving in there. He goes early. So also going to take away his ability of separation. So that's what I call that loadability phase. If we build stability and mobility, we expand our range of motion. Now it's, can we own that range of motion? How well can we load it? How well can we accept force, load force, and then transition force back out? So how good are we going to be able to transition? So that's my loadability. I look at that, especially with a swing, a pitch, a throw, any rotated sport. How good your loadability is going to determine so much. So I'm always looking at that kind of thing of, do we have good loadability, number one? If not, we're not going to be efficient. We're not going to be able to replicate over and over. So, yeah, we see it go down. And I think, you know, if you watch with a lot of his things, whether it's this squat, it's his swing, you're going to see good ones, bad ones. It's never really the same. He has a hard time repeating. So, again, remember, the FMS is a screen. We're looking at, does he have the ability to get somewhere or do it? Yes. Does he own it? No. So we can work on that. And the fact that he's younger, this would be the time. The brain, the body's a sponge. It's going to pick things up faster. So our job now is to give him a feel. If we can create a feel, he's going to understand where he is now and how he's moving better versus just throwing out cues. Stay back on the ball. Do this. You're dropping your hand. They're not going to get it. If their body doesn't understand the movement, they're not going to understand these cues. So we can't necessarily jump right to the skill. We have to give them a better foundation. So that's where I kind of go in all my approach in like an athlete's first. It's going to be, do they, number one, own stances, then positions, then movements? Set them up for success. Let's not set them up for failure.
Right. No, for sure. You know, a big thing here too, and just to use kind of the graphs and some things that you can pick up with using, and why would we use ground pressure? Why would we use a velocity graph? Why would we use a vertical force graph to do a screen? Well, you know, Mitch just went through a ton of different reasons why, but just let's cue in. And if you're in a baseball swing, golf swing, whatever swing you're in, if you can see how he gets into his toes way too much, especially as he unweights and lowers into his movement. And, you know, where he's going to create his vertical force is going to be basically, you know, as he comes back up and accelerates, right? How he's decelerating. And also you can see what everyone knows as a trace. And there's these signature traces, and there's these ways that a proper trace. A trace is your sway. It's deviations from your center point. And what we look for is a very still sway or center of pressure or very still trace, unless I'm going in a lateral perspective. And what you're seeing here is a trace that's dancing around. So he's having trouble stabilizing all that mobility. He's having trouble, and he gets to an anterior point because he's very hypermobile. he collapses a little bit. And then if you look at the velocity, he will go to his one side. You see how the center of pressure will shift and peak. See how it popped from side to side? As he comes through it, his general movement pattern is going to go from left to right. And with knowing that, when he goes through his actual baseball swing or golf swing, we'll know that his tendency when he comes into weighting and he comes into accelerating, he likes to shift his pressure probably in an opposing direction that he needs to be actually shifting. And so this creates drifting. It could, in an individual, create hanging back. So we are screening and seeing these things that we typically wait to see during the sport-specific swing. We could pick this up in something like this, as simple as a squat test. And you see that lateral shift. If you look at the velocity graph, when he does that, it shifts very quickly. You see that spike in the velocity graph? He spikes very quickly from one side to the other. Also, you can see his vertical force, and it's very slow here because he's moving slow, right? So he's not generating a lot of that force, but he's unweighting. See how it dips his total force at the bottom there in the graph? And then when he goes to accelerate, before he even starts to lift up, I don't know if you noticed that small little motion that he created. He generates that force, and that's what he's using to create power in the rest of his body to move his total body. And so you're seeing that vertical force spike there. And then when he gets to the top, he kind of unweights because he hyperextends out his knees. And so now he's not driving into the ground anymore. He's just standing still on top of the ground. And so we always have to look for that extension and what happens after that.
Before we move on, Phil and Mitch, you guys brought up really good points of, he's hypermobile. Okay, maybe this is to Mitch. How is that different from someone who has some mobility restrictions? How do you assess them, but then also how do you develop that plan? Because they're two different types of bodies, right?
Two different, and he's more on the uncommon side. Most of today's world are not hypermobile. They lack mobility. They're stiff, very stiff, rigid, right? We've got kids that can't touch their toes. We've got all this stuff, and both sides need stability. Now he's hypermobile, and so he's lacking some of the stability, but it's also he needs more strength in those range of motions. And I would prevent him from going deep into those range of motions because he can't control them. So I would shorten it all up. Now, the opposite side, we're going, man, we need to stretch more. We need to unlock all that tissue. We need to give him that stability and then create the mobility. In his sense, we don't have to create so much of the range of motion. He has too much range of motion right now. Everyone else needs more range of motion. So we need more strength in his movements and what he's doing. And then that real stability, meaning there's adequate flexibility. Check. He has that. Adequate strength? No. Adequate stability? In some of them, he does.
I think we lost Mitch there. I'll fill in real quick. So if we're looking at again, with the squatting motion, the deep squat, this is
or the other ones I'm trying to.
There he goes.
But with these other ones, the other side, we're trying to create this big range of motion or shoulder mobility. Him, I want to limit some, so he could stay in the range that he owns.
Yeah,
like Phil touched on some as he dropped in and where it like accelerated. Those are things where he's losing tension and the body's just kind of free falling. Wow. Yeah. So I mean, simple cues could be, again, that's kind of he's playing on the ground, not playing through the ground. So in his stance, we could already set him up and split the floor, turn tension on from the foot to hip. So create foot to hip connection, then foot to core connection. Pull at the top end, how his arms fall forward and he was kind of down on right side. So I know around scaps he's not fully engaged. Pull a port on the stick, create some tension, create feedback, give him neuromuscular feedback, and then his body will know more what to do. The body's smarter than the brain. The brain gets in the way. So we would, look at that thing. I mean, number one,
I think we're having some connection issues there.
Phil, let's move on with this is just a side right overhead squat.
Yep, no, for sure. So the FMS screen is a deep squat, overhead squat, as you saw here. One thing I do want to point out again, and it's easier to see from the side, is the shift in pressure from side to side. Again, he likes to move his body weight in through extension at full vertical and through his lateral motion. And so these are things that you know before they actually swing a golf club, swing a baseball bat. These are important factors to go into what is this person capable of. We've got to remember it's athlete first. I mean, you can teach a certain swing, a certain dynamic motion all day long, but if this person isn't capable of matching what you're asking, you know, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you understand their movement pattern, and that's what these screens are designed for, they're designed for that, to see those movement patterns. Let's jump into another movement pattern. That's with an assist. But let's jump into, our next movement pattern. And so with this is definitely a hurdle step or a cone step. And this movement pattern, we don't have the hurdle step there, but this is to show a sample of it. This is how we weight to one side and how we stabilize that control. And you see he's going to shift his body and shift his hip, which if he's a pitcher, he's going to, create sway. So right away, we're seeing sway happening. And if I create that plumb line, and let's draw that in again from where he started. Let me just pull that back. And so again, creating a center point to understand, really easy to do. I kind of put that off to the side. So let me just correct that a little bit. And already, if you're looking at where his belly button is, his spine, and Mitch pointed this out before, he's tipping, and you can see how he's tipping because we're using that. We're using that, the stick there to show how he's tipping that plumb line off to one side. So he's already setting up, swayed to one side. He's anticipating, I think, movement here. And when he goes into it, he really sways back against it. And that's something that we look for when we're doing single leg balance testing or bird balance testing. But here with the athlete, he's extremely shifted off. So he's depending too much on the wrong muscles to control it. Even though he's sitting pretty 50-50, you want to be about 60-40 in that foot pressure, but he's sitting pretty, centered, right? I mean, Mitch, why don't you break it down a little bit more here?
Yeah, I mean, we saw from the setup again, he had some tipping already leaning off the plumb line. He likes to sway and lead into one hip, but as soon as he lifted that foot off the ground, dove right into that right hip, what I call leaky hip syndrome. We don't want to have that leaky hip because that's just leaking energy and forces in all the wrong place. So again, he's playing on top of the ground right now. There is no force and tension going down through the ground. If we look at the angle of his shin angle, foot to shin angle, everything's popping out to the side. So I know his big toe is not doing enough work. I know that whole inner half of the foot, inner arch, big toe, the inner arch is not happening. He's trying to rely on that little small toe. We don't want that guy. We want the big one. And so there goes the hip leaks. Now look how far his body swayed off to the side. Going to have a harder time, number one, to stabilize force and then transfer that force back the other way. If we, look at other things, the leg goes straight up, too much sway, and then now we can see the ankle and the hip. He doesn't control the internal rotation, external rotation things going on. So there's a fight. He's got a battle going on inside his body. Our job for true performance is finding harmony and balance, letting them work together. So, I mean, ideally, this test is looking at when you lift a leg, you should be able to go straight up and down, have no sway. The foot and the ankle should not turn out, and we should just be able to go right up and over. So if we did have the hurdle there, right up over, tap the heel and come right back without having to sway out of that position.
Right, exactly. And, you see it in a lot of athletes, you see it in a lot of, doesn't matter their age. You see the rotation to the side that we're stabilizing to. And that, when we're transferring pressure from one side of our body to the other, we're basically going from standing on one leg to the other. And especially in a stride sport like baseball, we're going from a load side to a stride side, and we need to be able to stabilize that pelvis. We need to put it in the right position to generate the proper amount of force because it's all got to connect. And when we over rotate or we can't control rotation of the body and we're out of sync in that system, we then throw all of our sequencing off and we can't grab that ground force and actually distribute enough force through transfer. And that's something that we can pick up by looking at FMS test here. We see how that sway is happening, how he's unbalanced, where that's, setting up, and how he's creating that rotation with it. And that's just a simple, hurdle step test or single leg test. Let's jump into the next, inline lunge test of FMS. So it's the third test. And let's take a little peek here at what that looks like. And so we're going to set up in position. He looks really lined up well. If I'm subjectively looking at him and I don't have these wonderful V1 tools, I'm saying looks pretty good. He might be a little bit rotated to that back hip side, but he is opened up to that side. He can get level. Is there restriction? Is there hip flexor? What's going on there? But with the tool, you're able to see distribution of pressure. He's completely loaded in the backside. All right. I don't want to be loaded in the backside. I want to be centralized. And you can see the COP. You can see where that's set up right now. Is my center of pressure in the wrong place when I set up in a tandem stance like this? And then when we go into that actual focus and we see him transfer into the actual movement, watch the COP transfer anteriorly. And we saw that in the squat test. We saw immediate transfer into the toes, right? And so we saw that he likes to get anterior. And I'll tell everybody and every viewer on here, he likes to get into those toes when he's swinging that baseball bat, through his stride and into his launch. He's into that toe and he's not getting that heel down to create torque force where I need to generate that force. And if you're a baseball player or golf, that's how we rotate. We got to get that down. We got to generate it from the ground. We got to harness that, and we got to spin that body. And if we're getting into the toes, we've become completely linear. I can't now rotate. I'm depending on my upper body to create the actual motion. And so that's another thing that we're seeing here with a test like this with FMS and where that pressure is. Very balanced. If you look at his sway, his trace, he went in a straight line. This time he wasn't going in a circle, so he has the ability to get there. But Mitch, you brought up and you just said it a minute ago about getting into that big toe, and I'm not really seeing it as much in this one. I think it was the other one we uncovered. He has a tendency to flop the foot, and he has a tendency to come out of that because that hypermobility. And that typically leads him to not being able to harness enough stability on the backside to create enough rotational force. You want to go into a little bit of that?
Yeah. Sees a lot of similar patterns from the squat. He's kind of like a knee driver. A lot of his movements are dictated to go to the knee first, and they should be going through the hip. The hip should drive the knee, dumb joint. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's completely at the mercy of your ankle and your hip. And he's always liking to go to the knee, so you're taking away power. The power's in the backside and in the posterior chain. I think it was in one of the other ones we saw. I immediately saw how there we're going to start to see it a little bit in that picture, how he starts to go out to those little toes. But I knew from his hip always being rotated out, externally rotated, he's going to like to flop and roll over out into those little toes. This is a lot of people again. So they don't have that big toe mojo. The more you have mobility, stability, that actively turns the glute on. More power, more drive. Everything's falling forward. He can't control where his hips are going. And he likes to move through that knee, and then he'll start flopping. Same idea, how he moved there and swayed. It's something that I'll be telling people on one leg, put your stake through the ground, to try to get them that idea of drive through the ground. And if we do that, they're all corkscrewing. Everything has rotation. So it's like if you internally rotate the leg to the femur, all that, we corkscrew through the ground, big toe's going to drive into the ground. And they're going to go, ooh, I feel that. Immediately, they get that sense of stability and tension at the hip and the glute. And it would be the same right here. If we could split the floor, create ground force there, get the big toe feel stability and tension at the hip. The great thing with this tool is we could say all of that. Now we see it happen because most of these people, whether a kid, adult, even pros, they think they're in a good position. They don't know where they're producing force, where their balance is, if they're swaying, all of these things. That's a
I think we keep cutting in and out on Mitch. We just don't have a great signal there, but we do apologize. I'm going to jump right into what I just drew up on the screen. So we're looking at dorsiflexion.
He's got great dorsiflexion and everything. He just doesn't know how to quite use it for him.
Right.
So we want to teach that and allow that to stay, because that's going to allow him to cut, transition, and move a lot better. So it's like there's very good things that he has. We're lacking that neuromuscular control.
Right. Again, anterior. And so when we dorsiflex, when we dorsiflex, we want weight in the heel. And a lot of people talk about range of motion and dorsiflexion. It's super important in golf. It's super important in baseball. It's how we load. It's how we generate force from the ground. But it's got to come from that heel. The heel is the posterior chain. It's the kinetic link. And what you're seeing here is great range of motion. And I see this all the time on social media. Look at the range of motion I have in dorsiflexion. Well, let's take a look at his foot. The foot pressure is completely in the ball. All right, it's all in the toes. That's not dorsiflexion. And so that really is a problem. We've got to make sure that you're actually generating that force in the heels and not in the ball of the foot. But for the sake of time, I think we need to, jump to the next one. We're going to talk about shoulder mobility. And this is definitely more of a upper body or a vision tool, assessment. And if you've ever run one of these, it's about getting your hands close together. And I know if it were me, my hands aren't going to get that close together.
You're not a 3.
That's pretty hypermobile shoulders going on right there. It's a pretty incredible range. But again, we've already identified he's a great mover. He just can't stabilize that movement yet. He will. He's going to learn how to do that and really work into that. And as we get older, we may be on either side of that fence. And it's really important to know what side of the fence you live on. And as the person's coach or the trainer or the athlete, I need to understand that. There's a big difference. And we have to understand the definition of flexibility. And that's a balance of stability and mobility. Okay. And so we don't want too much of one or too much of the other, because it's going to throw off our dynamic movement, our golf swing, our baseball swing, our pitching, those types of things. And so here he's centered. Again, you can see the tendency to one side. And what we're seeing here, though, is great flexibility in the shoulders. You don't really need a super great vision tool to do this, but you can capture some really important information here as far as right to left pressure when he's in something fully flexed like that. If you're way back, in your load, in your backswing, those types of things. If you're hinging into that where your hands are, that perception of space, these things are super important. And understanding that those angles that his elbows are making, and if I drew that in really quick and created that, those positions, and I'm just doing this super quick here. Let me do it. We want to match those angles up. I just tied into that one. Sorry. Let me get off of that. If I go here and here, we want to see symmetry. We want to see equal positioning. We want to see that kind of range. It really helps us identify what he can do with each side. And we would then do this assessment to each side. And really, there's not going to be a lot of function or movement here, but stability in actual motion. So again, using this amazing tool to be able to identify these and mark these. And let me tell you something, you're going to forget as a coach, as an athlete, what those markers were. Here, you can record this. If you're a coach, and a baseball coach, golf coach, whoever coach you are, this is a great tool if your student were to send you a video of them holding this position. They could do it with a broomstick. You could assess that information. You could tie that in. You could send them back that information. And you're able to then start to use these visual database, right, of lessons to really cue this up and to work through it. I really, really promote people to use athlete first screenings. It's really going to change the way, whether it's you or the person you're coaching, training, how they perform. It's super, super important to tie these together and to use objective analysis to do that. Why don't we move on to the next one? I want to see, I think it was this one here. I'm going to move into the second test. Here is, and what we did here is we did a modified active leg raise. Now, granted, if you are familiar with an FMS test, Typically, this is done lying on your back, open chain. Well, guess what? I don't lie on my back to swing a baseball bat. I don't lay on my back to swing a golf ball. I'm closed chained. I'm using the ground to generate force. I don't care what my leg can lift to in the air, okay? Because I'm not looking to kick anything. Yes, maybe in stride, maybe in pitching sequences, things like that. What's more important here? This is load. This is loading leg. This is stabilization of the rest of my body and how it's moving. So I'm going to turn it over to Mitch here. But as you break into that motion, and you see how he's using the stick mobility stick here to kind of keep his body in that nice straight line. You saw how he rotated externally there, but he was able to sequence into that actual movement. So you can match that up. You don't need the actual stick there, but it really helps as more of a corrective, and we kind of skipped the other corrective. We put a Moflex under his heels. He did a corrective there to really stabilize. So he's not getting completely in the toes, getting some pressure in the heels. Here, it's a corrective to help him stabilize his movement so he can start to learn what the movement's like. Right, Mitch?
Correct. Yeah. You're using this guy, right, to really kind of help him and guide him in a sense. It's also giving him some feedback and some definitely kinesthetic feedback, because kind of like, where's my spine in space? Am I rotating? Is that thing moving off of my center line? And then like what I had told you when I saw this, I like, by you putting it under his foot like that and creating internal rotation, it definitely aided him. It helped him because we already know he externally rotates a lot on that side. Without this, I guarantee this hip would have flown up even more. His foot would have turned out. He would have fully externally rotated, and then all of his force would have went out to his little toes. And then you start losing that balance. You see the wobble. You'll see their foot and their ankle just going crazy like they're standing on a vibration platform, right? And they're losing that feel under their big toe. So this guy actually aided and gave him some feel. This is something we would use. There's another drill that we actually use and came up with stick mobility is like, if we wanted to also work on this, I could take that stick and I would place it on top of his toes and then your hand on top of the other end as to now compress the stick. So you're going to push the same side, same hand, same foot, compress down through your arm, straight leg, and I'm going to put compression in there and create tension. So I'm going to radiate all those anterior tissues to help prevent him from externally rotating leaking. I'm going to turn in all that tissue, his obliques, his abs, but all of that anterior chain, so he gets a feel as he goes back. And then to aid into the hinge to feel that force go into your heel, where it should be as you go back, on the way down, we would push through the hand. The hand would be and the arm would be the leader to drive you back into your hinge and create length. So it's about creating length and pushing back through the heel, not just trying to go up and down. And then on the way up, the foot and the leg working from the ground up would be now your leader. It's going to lead the way. So it's going to produce the force and the hand reciprocates. So one's the mover, the other one's reciprocating force, but it's giving them feedback to be able to learn how to properly go into an RDL and not sway and shift. So you're right. These I use RDLs, variations of RDLs and single leg movements all the time, because this is how we have to transfer forces and then land in those forces, tremendous forces. Can we stabilize and, handle the amount of force that we created? There's that braking system.
Right. No, for sure. And I'm not sure if any of the viewers have ever used a pressure mat for upper body ground force and recruitment, but it's a way we use it in medicine and clinical perspectives, and it's a way we assess. Again, you're not going to be able to see that his center of pressure is slightly off to one side, at the start of this movement, and that's his favoring side, right? When he goes down into this movement, you're going to see how his sway pattern into that movement shifts. It's not bad, though. Look how centered he's able to continue that pressure. And at the bottom, and that bottom point of that movement, his body's not touching. He's able to keep his body symmetrical. He's able to use load for each side of his body. And there's two things that, in baseball or in golf, it's our feet and our hands, right? And it's those connections with the rest of the world, whether it's holding the ball, whether it's holding the bat, whether it's holding the club, whether it's, on the ground. it's important to know how both sides, our hands and feet, are working. And that's a way we can use the pressure mat to analyze a screen like this, where you would never, I don't care who you are, you might guess what that pressure is, right to left. But here you're able to capture that information and understand what he's doing as he's going through that. And I guarantee you, for most of us, you're going to see a lot more movement in that trace pattern. And it's not swaying or wobbling. It's just going side to side as he generates his force. And you can see the vertical force on the bottom when he unweights and then drives through that force. But he stays very neutral. And that's what we're looking for upper body strength and positioning and range of motion. Mitch, you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I mean, so everything you said, we see this. Here's where, like, with what I do, where I dive deeper and look at, like, what do they do good? What are the things holding them back? And then long-term health. So we already know if you're going to be an overhead athlete, you're throwing some, swinging a club overhead, any of that, what's the good chances of a shoulder or arm problem? If we looked at his push-up position, I would look there again. I'm going to look at the interaction of his scaps, because that really determines so much more of the throwing arm health. And his scaps weren't in the right place. We saw the feet. It did the same thing as all the screens before. He externally rotated and they kind of flopped off. And that's where we saw the sway and all that. But the fact that he was a good mover and he can compensate well, he was able to fix some of it. But, I'm going to look further and deeper at the elbow position, the scap position. There wasn't that force. And now with the mat, that's where we could say, hey, spread the floor, corkscrew your hands and pull your elbows to point backwards. Now your scaps and your lats engage. And now you got tremendous force and tension. Now you have stability in the scaps, and we can work that down. So it's like little things like that we'll look at to go, here's going to be long-term performance and health. And we can't get that by just saying, do a push-up. I could cue things, but we need that feedback of what he's really doing into the floor.
Right. And then here for Staples,
we're going to look at that stuff of like what his hip does. Is he stabilized? He's going to go right into some external rotation. But, overall, the screen is, can you balance on that side? And then like a full screen would be, can I touch, elbow and knee together and get back out there? In all my years, I don't have many people that will hit that 3 on their ipsilateral side very well right away. They might get there, but it's herky-jerky. It's not really smooth and fluid. And then we see the hip turn and all these things. So, what I could see, and maybe a little hard from this position, I can tell that his left foot and that shin angle is outside of his body. So he's using that external rotation to aid in his balance from falling over to the left side. Most people aren't catching this stuff.
Right. Yeah,
it's just,
definitely.
This is what I do. I see this all the time. I assess people from the time I see them, how they're standing, how they're walking and moving towards me, because this is what they do all the time. Then we start diving into like the actual movements and things. But, like I said earlier today, an athlete's always going to try to fix something. They're going to get competitive. Mm-hmm. We need to catch them in things too that they can't really cheat. With all the pressure map and all that, you can't cheat it. It's going to show what's happening. It's a great tool to give feedback and show them really where they are.
Right.
So
exactly.
Real quick, before we got about 7, 8, 10 minutes left. I wanted to hit this point and get your guys' feedback on this. So obviously players, athletes who have mobility, stability issues, there are certain drill sets, right, Mitch, that you give those players based on their deficiencies, right?
Correct.
So Phil and Mitch, how can you use ground pressure? Or how can you use evidence-based information to try to just make that assessment more efficient and be able to say, yes, that drill is actually we're going to validate that drill and make sure that that's actually going to get him to a better spot versus just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it works.
Yeah, I like that you said, because I think, let's be honest, most people just throw stuff at a wall. I used to say, like, to someone, I'd see them where they'd go and train. It's like, it's not always that they're bad exercise or this and that. There's just no rhyme or reason to it. There's no order. It didn't really serve a purpose. So my whole goal is like, hey, move better, but move with a purpose. What's our purpose in something? If we just threw, crap in a fan and it splattered all over, like, there's your workout. No rhyme or reason. Now, there might be good things in there. So there's these correctives in what you said, but it's got to give us some instant feedback. It's got to put us in the right direction. So we might go, okay, because still, again, we could be guessing. We're seeing something and we're like, oh, let's try this. Let's do this. There's always some guesswork in there. Over time, the better you get at understanding all of it, we're not guessing as much. We've seen it happen over and over. What this is going to do, though, it's going to validate everything. It's going to take a lot of that guesswork out. I'm not just guessing. I'm picking the right direction to go because I'm seeing, look at the sway, look at how he uses his pressure, how he transfers these forces, all of these things. It's what we're trying to do. So versus trying to get these drills to kind of, oh, is that doing it? Can you get this? Like, this is setting you, putting you right in the direction, right from the get-go. Let's take a lot of guesswork out. Let's lead them in the right direction. You know, otherwise people go down that rabbit hole and they might spend hours, days, weeks, months. Something should happen right away if we're going on the right direction.
Right. Awesome.
No, for sure. No, for sure. I mean, that's really what we wanted to give a little sample set to everybody and the viewers tonight. I mean, this was definitely a baseball wheelhouse Tuesday Traces, but obviously we get a lot of golf listeners and we appreciate that. I mean, it's swing sports. It's dynamic movement. It all correlates. You're going to learn a lot from the science and the approach. You saw tonight, we focused on FMS screening, so functional movement screens, how you can use a V1 ground pressure tool to assess that information. We used the V1 Pro tonight, the PC version. We were able to capture a lot of information. We were able to record that information. You can send that information to a student. You can record it for yourself. This is, these are tools that are used, whether it's, a golf coach, a baseball coach, and when we're talking about this, and whether you're in golf or baseball, I mean, it's really important, that conditioning side and that movement side. And that's why we brought Mitch on tonight. He's by far one of the top leading experts in movement science. And really, I mean, everybody got really great education information tonight to understand all the things that you could look for, right? And unfortunately, you're not going to have, Mitch standing next to you when you're assessing, but you're going to have an objective tool and a quantifiable tool to help you see the things Mitch can see with his naked eye. I mean, he's been doing this a long time, and this is what he's an expert at. This is why he invents certain products for it. This is what he does. But if you want to bridge that gap in looking at your athletes, looking at yourself, these V1 tools allow you to bridge that gap, allow you to catch up with it. And it's a way better way than just subjectively taking a look at someone and saying, that looks right. I mean, that's the whole reason why you would use a V1 product. Whether you're doing a golf swing, baseball swing, what have you, you've already taken that time to then think about, I want a little bit more. I want to be empowered. I want to take that next step to understand what is going on with this dynamic movement. And like I said, swing sports is swing sport. Dynamic rotation, angular momentum, linear momentum. These are all happening. All right. And this is all the same. We're humans. Like I've said in the past, if you've listened, there's three things at play. It's us. All right. We're a small mass against a very strong force called gravity and a really large mass called the world. All right. And the place that all of this collides is at your feet. Okay. And that's where it starts. And understanding ground force is really important to understand how the rest of your movement works and how you work against gravity. And so when you're looking and seeing these tools and they're giving you that empowerment to be able to translate that information into calls to action. Why do we do all this? Because we want to correct something, right? And whether it's correcting the athlete first, the golf swing, the baseball swing, that's why these tools are so effective. Mitch, I'll let you have a moment as we wrap up.
Yeah, I think that was awesome. Like, you hit on so much, where I look at in this world, it's like whether we're just going for the performance side, we're rehabbing the injury to get them back. Why did that injury happen in the first place? So much of this all takes play in that interaction to the ground. And you said it great. Like, I love that, whether it's a golf swing, swinging a baseball bat, a tennis racket, anything that's swinging, they're all rotational. Anything rotational sport, anything that's a swing sport, a throwing motion, so much similarities. And even then we could go into like soccer, playing through the ground, a kicking action. It's all rotational. All takes ground force. To be good at any of it, You need to create tremendous force through the ground and have that connection that spirals up the body, up the chain through the upper body, because then boom, that's where it all comes out. So it applies all over the map there, you know. Wow. Showing you what we could get so we could create outcomes. Like I said, everything that I do is about creating an outcome. So it ties in all over, you know. And then I like, you know, to always say, hey, athlete first, also just in life. You know, life's the biggest sport of all. Lots of stuff thrown at us. Gravity always upon us. Like, how are we going to win in life? Take an athletic approach, but take that personal, individualized approach so we can get better. Thrive again, right? Like I said, thrive in life. Stop just simply surviving in life and sport.
Love it.
You know?
Well
work
said.
from the ground up. Build the feet in the ground.
Anthony, I'll take you. My dogs keep photobombing, but I'll let you take it.
Yeah, no, Mitch. Phil, you mentioned Mitch. You know, Mitch may not be there with you when you do the assessment, but Mitch is a V1 customer, V1 pro. So you potentially could send your video to Mitch and he can assess you. So we'll get there. But no, thanks everyone for popping on here. And Mitch, again, thank you for coming on and, you know, dropping your knowledge bombs and all this information, right? Super important, especially in the world of golf, baseball, anything rotational. So right. Thanks again for popping on here. And for those who are here, please, you can go ahead to sales@v1sports.com if interested in our ground pressure products, our vision products, and then also for our ground pressure certification. So good night.
Thank you. Good night, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Mitch, appreciate it. See you, everybody. Thanks for
appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.